Perseus was destined to kill his grandfather, until a gaze turned men to stone. In ancient Greece, one hero had to hunt the most dangerous creature alive, Medusa, whose eyes were a death sentence. Our story begins not with Perseus, but before his birth, in the bronze-walled city of Argos. King Acrisius ruled there, a wealthy man but troubled. He had no sons, only a daughter named Danaë, beautiful as the dawn. The king's heart grew heavy with worry about his legacy, about who would inherit his throne when he grew old. So he did what kings often did in those ancient days. He traveled to the oracle at Delphi to learn his fate. The oracle's words chilled him to his bones. She told him he would have no sons. More than that, she prophesied that one day his own grandson, a son born to Danaë, would be the instrument of his death. Acrisius returned to Argos consumed by fear. He could not kill his own daughter. That would bring the wrath of the gods and the Furies who punish such crimes. But neither could he allow her to marry and bear children. So he made a terrible choice. Beneath his palace, Acrisius built a chamber of bronze, a prison underground where sunlight barely reached. Into this chamber he placed Danaë, sealing her away from the world, from any man who might become her husband. There she remained, attended only by a single servant, isolated in her underground prison, watching the days pass in dim lamplight. But prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves, no matter what mortals do to prevent them. Zeus, the king of the gods, looked down from Olympus and saw Danaë in her bronze chamber. He fell in love with her beauty and her gentle spirit, unbroken despite her imprisonment. Zeus could go anywhere, take any form. Locked doors and bronze walls meant nothing to him. He came to Danaë as a shower of golden light, pouring through the tiny gaps in her prison ceiling, and in that divine radiance, they were together. 9 months later, the sound that Acrisius dreaded echoed up from the underground chamber. The cry of a newborn child. A boy. Danaë named him Perseus. When Acrisius learned of the child, terror gripped him once more. The prophecy was coming true. Yet still he could not bring himself to murder his own daughter and grandson directly. Instead, he devised what he thought was a solution that would spare him the guilt. He had a great wooden chest constructed, large enough for a woman and child. He placed Danaë and infant Perseus inside, sealed it shut, and had it carried to the sea. There, his men pushed it into the waves and watched it drift away, abandoned to the mercy of the tides. The chest floated for days, tossed by winds and currents. Inside, Danaë held her baby close, singing to him softly while the wood creaked and seawater seeped through the cracks. But Zeus had not forgotten them. He guided the winds and calmed the waters, and the chest drifted gently until it reached the shore of a small island called Seriphos. A fisherman named Dictys found the chest tangled in his nets one morning. When he opened it and saw the woman and child inside, still alive, he took them to his home. Dictys was a kind man, a bachelor who had lived alone for many years. He welcomed Danaë and Perseus, giving them shelter and protection. There on that small island, far from Argos, Perseus grew from infant to boy to young man, helping Dictys with his fishing boats, growing strong under the Mediterranean sun. The years passed peacefully, but peace, as it often does, came to an end. Dictys had a brother named Polydectes, who was king of Seriphos. Polydectes saw Danaë, now a woman of mature beauty, and desired her. He pursued her, but Danaë refused him. She had no wish to marry this king who grew more insistent and aggressive as time went on. Perseus, now grown tall and strong, stood between them, protecting his mother, and this enraged Polydectes. The king began to scheme. He announced a banquet, declaring that he intended to seek the hand of Hippodamia, a princess of another land. Each guest, he said, should bring a horse as a gift to help him win her favor. Perseus, a poor fisherman's boy, had no horse to give. At the banquet, when the king pointed this out, Mocking him before all the assembled nobles, Perseus's pride flared. He declared that he would bring Polydectes any gift he named, even the head of Medusa herself. The room fell silent. Everyone knew of Medusa, one of the 3 Gorgon sisters who lived at the edge of the world. Medusa had once been beautiful, a priestess in Athena's temple, but she had been transformed into a monster with brass hands, golden wings, and serpents for hair. Most terrible of all, anyone who looked directly at her face turned instantly to stone. Around her lair stood dozens of statues, men and heroes who had tried to kill her, frozen forever in their final moments of horror. Polydectes smiled. This was exactly what he wanted. He accepted Perseus's vow, knowing the young man would never return. With Perseus dead at the edge of the world, Danaë would be unprotected, and the king could claim her. Perseus left the banquet and walked alone to the shore, understanding with growing dread what he had promised. How could he kill something he could not look at? How could he even find the Gorgons, whose lair was beyond the known world? He stood on the beach, looking out at the dark water, feeling hopeless. It was then that the gods intervened. A shimmering light appeared before him, and 2 figures manifested. Athena, goddess of wisdom, in her gleaming armor, and Hermes, the messenger god, with his winged sandals. They had been watching Perseus, Zeus's mortal son, and decided to aid him. Athena spoke first. She told Perseus that he could not face Medusa alone and unprepared. She gave him her shield, polished to a mirror brightness, telling him to look only at Medusa's reflection, never directly at her. Hermes gave him an adamantine sword, a blade so sharp it could cut through the Gorgon's scales. But these gifts alone were not enough. Perseus would need 3 more items, Hermes explained, and these could only be obtained from the Hesperides, the nymphs who guarded the garden at the western edge of the world. To find the Hesperides, he must first find the Gree, the Grey Sisters. The Gree were ancient beings, 3 sisters who shared among them 1 eye and 1 tooth, passing them back and forth between them. They alone knew the way to the Hesperides. Hermes told Perseus where to find them, in a gray land of perpetual twilight, and then the gods departed, leaving the young hero to begin his quest. Perseus traveled north and west, beyond the borders of Greece, through lands that grew stranger and more desolate. Finally, he came to the place where the Gree dwelled, in a landscape of ash and fog. He found them by a dark pool, 3 hunched figures, ancient beyond reckoning, squabbling as they passed their single eye between them. Perseus waited and watched. When one sister removed the eye to pass it to another, he darted forward and snatched it from the air. The Grey sister shrieked and groped blindly, demanding he return it. Perseus held it high and told them he would return the eye only if they revealed how to find the Hesperides. They had no choice. They told him the way, and when Perseus placed the eye back in their reaching hands, he departed quickly, following their directions westward. The garden of the Hesperides lay far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, at the very edge where ocean encircled the world. It was a place of impossible beauty, where golden apples grew on trees tended by singing nymphs. When Perseus arrived and told them his quest, the Hesperides took pity on him. From their treasury they brought forth 3 gifts. The first was a pair of winged sandals like those Hermes wore, which would allow Perseus to fly. The second was a leather bag called a Pegasus, which would safely contain Medusa's head once he had taken it. The third was the cap of Hades, which would make the wearer invisible. Equipped now with divine gifts, Perseus put on the winged sandals and flew north across the dark ocean toward the land of the Hyperboreans, beyond the north wind, where the Gorgons made their home. As he flew through the cold air, he thought of his mother waiting on Seriphos, and his resolve strengthened. The approach to the Gorgons' lair was easy to identify. The ground was littered with statues, men and animals frozen in stone, their faces locked in expressions of terror. Perseus descended carefully, pulling the cap of Hades over his head, disappearing from sight. He walked invisible among the stone figures, drawing closer to where the three Gorgon sisters lay sleeping. Two of them, Stheno and Euryale, were immortal and could not be killed. But Medusa, the youngest, was mortal, vulnerable to a blade. Perseus had to be certain he chose correctly. He crept closer, his heart pounding, careful not to look directly at any of them. Their serpent hair writhed even in sleep, hissing softly. Using Athena's polished shield, he looked at their reflections. There, in the mirror-bright bronze, he could see them safely. He identified Medusa, smaller than her sisters, lying between them. Perseus drew his sword and held the shield so he could watch her reflection. He raised the blade, steadied his breathing, and struck with all his strength. The sword cut clean through Medusa's neck. Her eyes opened for just an instant, but Perseus looked only at the reflection. Her head fell free, and from her severed neck, two creatures sprang forth. First came Chrysaor, a giant with a golden sword. Second came Pegasus, the winged horse, both born from her blood and the divine essence within her. They emerged and fled into the sky. Stheno and Euryale woke with terrible shrieks. Perseus, still invisible, grabbed Medusa's head by her serpent hair without looking at it directly, thrust it into the Pegasus, and leaped into the air. The winged sandals carried him up and away as the two immortal Gorgons screamed in fury below, unable to pursue him into the sky. Perseus flew south and west, back toward home, exhausted but triumphant. As he flew over the coast of Ethiopia, he saw below a strange sight. A young woman was chained to rocks by the sea, waves crashing around her. Circling her in the water was an enormous shadow. A sea monster, sent by Poseidon, was about to devour her. Perseus descended. The woman was Andromeda, daughter of King Zeus and Queen Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia had boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than the sea nymphs, and in revenge, Poseidon had sent the monster to ravage the coast. The oracle told Zeus that only by sacrificing Andromeda could the kingdom be saved. So here she stood, chained and waiting for death. Perseus landed on the rocks beside her. He saw her beauty and her courage in the face of death, and his heart moved. He asked if she would marry him if he saved her. Through her tears, Andromeda agreed. Perseus flew out over the water, removed the cap of invisibility, and drew the Gorgon's head from the bag. When the sea monster rose up to strike, Perseus held Medusa's head toward it. The creature saw her face and instantly turned to stone, a massive statue that sank beneath the waves. Perseus freed Andromeda from her chains and flew with her to her father's palace. Zeus and Cassiopeia, grateful beyond measure, agreed to the marriage. But at the wedding feast, a complication arose. Andromeda had been promised before to another man, her uncle Phineus, who arrived with armed men to claim her by force. The hall erupted in violence. Swords clashed and men shouted. Perseus fought as well as he could, but he was vastly outnumbered. Finally, he called out a warning for Andromeda and her family to close their eyes and turn away. Then he reached into the Pegasus and pulled forth Medusa's head once more. Phineus and all his warriors looked upon it and became stone, frozen mid-battle, statues scattered throughout the hall. With the threat ended, Perseus carefully returned the head to its bag. He and Andromeda departed Ethiopia, flying north across the sea toward Greece. They stopped first at the island of Seriphos, where Perseus had left his mother so long ago. He found that in his absence, Polydectes had not relented. The king had tried repeatedly to force Danaë to marry him. She and Dictys had taken refuge in a temple, the only place Polydectes dared not violate. Perseus went directly to the king's palace, where Polydectes was holding court with his nobles, confident that Perseus had perished long ago. When Perseus entered the hall, Polydectes stared in shock and disbelief. The young man announced that he had returned with the gift he had promised. Polydectes, recovering his arrogance, mocked him and demanded proof. Perseus told everyone who wished to live to close their eyes. Then he drew out Medusa's head and held it before the king. Polydectes and those nobles who had supported his persecution of Danaë looked upon the Gorgon and turned to stone. The king became a statue on his throne, frozen in an expression of cruel dismissal. With Polydectes dead, the people of Seriphos asked Dictys to be their king. The kind fisherman who had rescued Danaë and Perseus so many years before accepted, and he ruled them well and justly. Perseus gave the winged sandals, the Pegasus, and the cap of Hades back to Hermes to return to their proper owners. The head of Medusa he gave to Athena, who placed it upon her shield, the Aegis, where it remained ever after, turning her enemies to stone. Perseus, Andromeda, and Danaë left Seriphos and sailed for the mainland. Danaë wished to return to Argos, to her father, hoping that enough years had passed that the old king might welcome them, and the prophecy might be forgotten. But when their ship landed and they learned the news, they discovered that Acrisius, still haunted by the oracle's words, had fled Argos the moment he heard Perseus was alive and returning. The old king had gone north to the city of Larissa, hoping distance would protect him from fate. Perseus chose not to pursue him. Instead, he and his family settled at Argos, where Perseus was welcomed as a hero. Time passed peacefully. Then one day, word came that the king of Larissa was holding funeral games in honor of his deceased father. Athletes from all over Greece were invited to compete. Perseus decided to attend, to honor the dead and test his skills in the competitions. He traveled to Larissa and entered the games. His event was the discus throw. When his turn came, Perseus took up the heavy bronze disc, spun, and released it with all his strength. But a sudden wind caught the discus, carrying it off course. It flew wild into the crowd of spectators and struck an old man in the head, killing him instantly. When they carried the body forward, Perseus looked upon the face and recognized him, though they had never met. It was Acrisius, his grandfather. The prophecy, after all those years, all those precautions, all that suffering, had come true. Perseus had killed the king of Argos, not through hatred or intention, but through accident and fate. Perseus was filled with grief. He gave his grandfather full funeral rites, honoring him, though Acrisius had tried to kill both him and his mother. The people of Argos forgave Perseus, understanding it had been the will of the gods, and the unavoidable fulfillment of prophecy. But Perseus could not bear to rule in this city where he had killed his own grandfather. He exchanged kingdoms with the king of Tiryns, who had ties to Argos, and there Perseus and Andromeda settled. They founded the city of Mycenae, whose massive walls would stand for thousands of years. They had children together, many children, and their descendants became the greatest heroes of Greece. Their son Perseus became the ancestor of the Persian kings. Their other children founded dynasties and kingdoms throughout the ancient world. Perseus and Andromeda grew old together, their love enduring through the years. When they died, Athena placed them in the heavens as constellations, where they remain to this day, along with Cassiopeia and Cepheus, eternal in the stars. The shield that had saved Perseus, with Medusa's head upon it, remained with Athena. Sailors would sometimes swear they saw her image in storms, the Gorgon's face flashing in lightning, protecting those whom the goddess favored. And in coastal caves and tide pools, when new coral grew in strange, twisted shapes, people would say that these were formed by drops of Medusa's blood that fell into the sea when Perseus flew overhead, transforming whatever they touched into stone. This is the story of Perseus, the hero who fulfilled a prophecy despite all efforts to prevent it, who killed a monster no one could look upon, who saved a princess and founded a kingdom, and who teaches us that fate moves in its own currents, that courage can turn curses into blessings, and that sometimes the impossible quests are the ones that make us who we are meant to be. Rest now, with this ancient tale settling into your mind like sand drifting to the ocean floor. The gods have withdrawn to their mountains. The monsters have turned to stone. The heroes have taken their place among the stars. Let the story carry you gently into sleep, into dreams, into the peaceful dark where all stories rest until they are told again. Thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep well,